So this right here is the full PDF for the book Thanks for the Memories by Brice Taylor. Brice Taylor goes into different accounts in regards to what takes place when it comes to the mind control element, as well as certain history when it comes to certain celebrities that have been victimized by the CIA experiment. So it says more than 25 years have passed since I began research into what was then called brainwashing, a comically euphemistic term invented in the 1950s by CIA propaganda specialist Edward Hunter. It's been 21 years since my book on the subject, Operation Mind Control, was published internationally, and 5 years since it reappeared as the greatly expanded limited researcher's edition, featuring an account of Lois that offers a synopsis of the book you hold in your hands. Now it can be told, Lois, or Lois, is Susan Ford, whose pseudonym is Brice Taylor. Her book, Thanks for the Memories, which by all reports is greatly anticipated by an audience better educated than the one I encountered in the 1970s, is now published for all the world to read. This is a good read, and this is not for the faint of heart. Just when it comes to me going through this, I hope you guys enjoy this. I wrote my book Operation Mind Control while living in Arizona, still a backward state dominated by federal funds and jobs, and the dissociated and extremely provincial beliefs that come with it. In the 70s, most of the people I spoke with about what I call generically mind control thought I was crazy. Those who are not afraid to express their opinions on the subject believed it to be impossible. They strongly believed they could not be made to do something against their will and without their knowledge. They believed they had indomitable powers of will like the CIA-funded psychologist Timothy Leary's fellow debater and Watergate burglar G. Gordon Liddy. They believed beyond a shadow of a doubt that they could not be broken, fragmented, and mentally enslaved by any technology, even if it included hypnosis, drugs, electronic brain simulation, or what came to be called biological process control. My interest in this subject was piqued by a young man. So we're going to go on to further reading. And brothers, please understand that the MKUltra project is government sponsored. The CIA MKUltra project is government sponsored. So I just wanted to go into the traumatic element of it. David I had known all my life. He returned from a 4-year tour with the United States Air Force in a confused and deeply tormented state. You cannot say that he had destroyed mine. He suffered from complete amnesia about the past years of service in the USAF, but he was making straight A's in pre-medical courses at a prominent university. I did not recognize him as he sat, slumped in an overstuffed chair in my living room in 1973. He had undergone a couple of years of treatment with a competent psychiatrist and was finally asked by her, "Do you want to know what this is and how it was created, or do you want to just be able to function?" He decided the functioning was good enough and his treatment accelerated, taking a wide turn away from the historical events he remembered, which included being a human tape recorder and witnessing the most secret negotiations with North Vietnam and with royals of the Arabic persuasions who beheaded a prisoner he had just witnessed being interrogated. The image of this decapitation still haunts him in his dreams. Yes, that's a part of the trauma. That's a part of the trauma, and the after effects of it is what really triggers the subject, just when it comes to them breaking down or going to those sort of alterations where, it breaks up in their mind because of the effects of the trauma subsequent from the experience or the experiment. In 1973, the Rockefeller Commission's report revealed that CIA Director Richard Helms had supposedly destroyed 153 separate files on a long-running top secret project called MKUltra as its last act in office. In years to come, many of those files were discovered as misplaced files. They revealed a long history of criminal activities by individuals who hid behind the National Security Act and ran amok, arrogantly treating citizens of their own country as just so many lab rats. I can hypnotize a man without his knowledge or consent into committing treason against the United States. Dr. George Estabrooks, 1943. So it says, George Hoban Estabrooks. I wanted to go further into the understanding of Mr. Estabrooks in regards to, the handler aspect, or him being at the center of hypnosis. So it says George Hoban Estabrooks, born December 16th in 1895 and died December 30th, 1973, was a Canadian-American psychologist and an authority on hypnosis during World War II. He was a Harvard University graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, he was a Mason, and chairman of the Department of Psychology at Colgate University. He claimed to have used hypnosis to help spies have split personalities, to not actually know they were spies in case of capture. He stated it was easy to create and easy to cure using hypnosis. He joined the 1st Canadian Division in his teens at the age of 19, became the youngest commissioned officer. Later in life, he became a 32nd degree Knights Templar Mason and wrote various articles and books, including these 4 publications: The Future of Human Mind, Hypnotism, Spiritism, and Man, the Mechanical Misfit. So this just correlates with what we understand now, just in these modern times. It's always going to have a connotation on it that's based in Luciferianism. It's always going to be like that. It says he claimed to have used hypnosis to help spies have split personalities, and this is where you get the understanding of multiple personality disorder from. It all goes back to him. Just when it comes to him being at the forefront with the initial phase of it. Multiple personality disorder. This person was a 32nd degree Knights Templar Mason. And just in my old video where I was doing on Jay-Z, where it got blocked, the cross of Lorraine is associated with the Knights Templar. It's associated with the Knights Templar. And you see the cross of Lorraine on the Douce bottle. Estabrooks did experiments on children. He exchanged correspondence with then FBI Director Edgar Hoover about using hypnosis to interrogate juvenile delinquents. It is possible he used Manchurian candidates in children. It's crazy, man, and this is where it all comes from. Psychiatrist. Now, when I look at this term psychiatrist, I automatically think about what took place with Mr. Kanye West over the recent years. Just when it comes to the revelatory aspect of the entertainment industry, where he was going into his expose. And, he outed a psychiatrist or a handler named Harley Pasternak. Harley Pasternak is a trainer for certain celebrities. He also is a handler or a psychiatrist. He spent time with Mac Miller before he died, so there's more than meets the eye when it comes to that story, that angle. Harley Pasternak. And when it comes to the entertainment industry, brothers, sisters, people who like to gainsay and they don't understand, it's important for us to consider what we don't see, because that's what's really moving these things. That's what's really galvanizing these things, what we do not see. That's the power of Satan. It's all about deception. Everything is all about trickery. If you don't have the ability to discern the trickery aspect, then you're not as spiritual as you think you are. And it's not about who's more spiritual, I'm more. It's not about that. It's just about the understanding of how to identify these things. The spirit is pretty much what helps you understand how to see things beyond the scope, because it's not going to be apparent. Satan doesn't work with overtness. Everything is covert with Satan. Everything is covert with Satan. So you have to understand that it's not about the appearance. It's all about the intangible aspect. Author of Patty Hearst's Brainwashing Defense and founding member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. As I was researching the Rockefeller Commission's report, following anecdotal evidence, putting the pieces together, then writing what turned out to be Operation Mind Control, I felt like the villagers in this Sufi tale. An elephant had entered a cave near a town in Morocco and had bellowed all night, keeping the whole village awake. Nobody in the town had seen an elephant, nor did anyone know what an elephant looked like. The villagers held a meeting, and 4 brave people among them volunteered to go into the cave to investigate what was making the strange bellowings. The first one felt the elephant's trunk and came out to report a large python was making the noise they heard. The second one felt a foot and came out to report that a palm tree was making a noise. The third one felt the elephant's tail and came out to report that a broom, obviously controlled by a witch, was making a noise. The fourth villager felt the elephant's ear and came out to report that there was nothing to fear because a large leaf from a tropical plant was making a noise. Once they understood there was nothing to fear, the villagers went to sleep that night and didn't hear the elephant snorting and bellowings as he left the cave, nor did they mention it again. In those days, shrinks, which are psychiatrists and psychologists, told me that what I was reporting were the results of a disease called schizophrenia. The word meant fragmented personality, but in time, schizophrenia turned out to be a familiar disease which could be treated and controlled with medication. The stories I was reporting took several years to understand. I eventually discovered that what I was reporting was the real cause of the cryptocracy's trained elephant in the particular cave next to our hometown. And just going back to the term bellowing, bellowing just means to shout. And also, as I read, I may have mispronounced the word familial and pronounced it with familiar because they sound the same. Familiar just relating to the aspect of a family disease like schizophrenia. It's something that's related to family. I cannot tell you the experiences Sue Ford reports are accurate to the letter, since I was not a witness to all of them. But as I revealed in Operation Mind Control in 1994, I once saw Sue on a Palm Springs golf course in the company of her alleged handler, Bob Hope. At that time, I was editor-in-chief of Palm Springs Life magazine, which had just won the Maggie Award for publishing the Best City magazine. It was at the Bob Hope Classic that I saw Sue, but I didn't speak to her as I was busy covering the happenings and celebrities, which have graced the magazine since the 1950s. Sue was one of the Bob Hope Classic hostesses, assisting the public and the press in a variety of functions. My path crossed Sue's again years later when I was interviewing another survivor of mind control, but I'll spare you those details. Just read my book. I can tell you that Sue Ford believes the story she has written with her all her being, and her account as described herein has remained consistent. Most of her memories conveyed in her book she obtained outside of the therapy setting on the island of Kauai while journaling on the beach. Since she could not afford a therapist at that time, the perceived safety of the location and the steady sound of the waves in the background provided her with the ability to focus inward, allowing intense flashbacks to recur, including intense memory of her physical sensations during those events, called body memories, all of which she was able to write down in her journals. Sue's journals are amazingly free of mistakes, and that's no small feat since they were written in indelible ink. One gets the impression that Sue simply downloaded this material from her inner multiple personalities who were desperately wanting to get this information out. Offering up these truths in these post-false memory Spendrome Foundation days takes courage. The well-funded foundation composed of alleged pedophiles and psychiatrists, my term for professionals who work for the CIA and mind control projects over a period of approximately 50 years, has led an effective fight in the courts to establish the fact that a person can easily be made to believe things which are not true. When I asked many of those who would later sit on the FMSF board if a person could be made to do something against their will and without their knowledge, they denied that it was possible in the mid-70s. They have not yet turned their earlier stance completely around, nor have they taken the next step to offer proof that a person can be made to do something against their will and without their knowledge. But they have gone far enough with their argument that justice is no longer served by eyewitness accounts. Responding to FMSF lawsuits, the state of California, I'm told, has made new laws which would disqualify the testimony of anyone who has ever confessed to having been hypnotized. Most lawyers and judges don't understand dissociative disorders because most mental health professionals don't understand them, and or haven't bothered to educate the judicial branch of government to begin to understand the full range of dissociative disorders, from post-traumatic stress disorder to bipolar disorder to the former multiple personality disorder, aka dissociative identity disorder, DID. One must confront the national security state and its military/industrial complex. Once again, it says one must confront the national security state and its military industrial complex. That's where it all starts. That's where it stems from. When you think about Martin Lawrence, when you think about J. Cole, when you think about Shaquille O'Neal, the experiment was done on a military base. They all come from the military. Just in terms of the experiment in regards to the MKUltra procedure, the military, which created the killers who all too often come home from their service to their country to beat and sexually abuse their wives and children. So that's why you see most of these celebrities, you hear about these stories of sexual abuse and all these allegations and whatnot because of the trauma that they had to undergo. They become more susceptible to that sexual depravity, that sexual fluidity that you hear about in Hollywood. Not even talking about like news stories about allegations, just talking about, the culture of that world where, sexual fluidity is something that is important to them because they believe in the spiritual exchanges and whatnot. Just talking on a more three-dimensional level in regards to the Luciferian aspect or the esoteric aspect. Going back to, MKUltra or the experiment, these things, it pretty much is the reason why you see these celebrities do what they do in terms of the sexual acts. Is based in a program and it's based in them being put under that type of trauma. And some of it is just them being turned out, compromised, going against their own will or pretty much being broken down, One gets the impression today that the majority of both mental health experts and judges believe that multiple personality disorder can easily be faked during expert examinations. However, most professionals with experience treating DID will tell you that it is almost impossible to fake an autonomic response, the kind of response that is used to assess the reality of a dissociated state. Faking an autonomic response would be about as easy as deliberately dilating or contracting your pupils without any change of light stimulus. Let's read that over again. It says, faking an autonomic response will be about as easy as deliberately dilating or contracting your pupils without any change of light stimulus. So it's just one of those things where it's out of your control pretty much. On one case, the Freedom of Thought Foundation sent me to investigate the case of Robert Joe Moody, an alleged serial killer with a top secret security clearance in the USMC. I brought one of the leading experts in the treatment of DID into the prison conference room. Within minutes, the doctor had the killer manifesting 4 different personalities. Yes, because he was under multiple personality disorder. When he first switched into the killer personality, the room filled with heat. The doctor told me it was not unusual for a whole variety of physical changes to occur when a multiple switch. And this is what you see with some of these celebrities, right? The room quickly getting hot from the temperature change of Moody's body when he switched from one personality to the other is a good example of the sort of autonomic response I'm talking about. I like to see even a best trained actor do that on cue. It's crazy, man. It just goes to show you the level of programming, how strong it is. After the interview with Moody, as we were leaving the prison, the doctor said to me, well, what do you want to do? Integrate these personalities or just let the little 9-year-old personality take the punishment? It's just crazy. Like, let me read that again. It says, well, what do you want to do? Integrate these personalities or just let the little 9-year-old personality take the punishment? So the level of programming was so strong that based off of the alterations, you had a 9-year-old personality in the midst of the multiple personalities. I think it was 4 personalities. So he operated at the level of a 9-year-old. And that was convenient for the case, just when it comes to, the trial and whatnot, him having to go to court. But it just speaks to how dirty this thing is, man. So dirty, but at the end of the day, man, it's one of those things where you like at a catch-22 because these people, they be of their own volition. They don't be of their own volition. So it's just one of those things where we pay attention to the experiment and the after effects of it, just the overall general understanding of the MKUltra experiment, After the interview with Moody, as we were leaving the prison, the doctor said to me, well, what do you want to do? Integrate these personalities or just let the little 9-year-old personality take the punishment, which was death by lethal injection, for all the others, just like he has always been doing. In the only study of death row inmates in America, roughly 14% tested as being undiagnosed cases of DID. Only a few prisons were used in this study. Well, that's the reason why, because they only use a few prisons. So you're going to have a low number based off of how many prisons you use and how many inmates you use. If you limit it, then you're going to have a small number. It focused only on convicted murderers and did not investigate violent criminals who were convicted of assault or crimes less than murder. Yeah, my point exactly. Other non-capital offenders were omitted. This study clearly showed the ignorance or prejudice of the American judicial system, one in which the diagnosis malingering is given to people suffering from DID. Malingering is a psychiatric term that means the subject is faking an illness. The poorly trained psychologists and psychiatrists working as court-appointed expert witnesses don't know how to test nor diagnose dissociative disorders. The most tragic moment of Moody's story for most is when they view the police videotape of the accused killer being read Miranda warnings. Here, clearly, is the 9-year-old personality. Wow. That's some shit there. Bobby picking up at a scab on his hand, speaking in a halting voice, not understanding who he was due to amnestic fugue. That's crazy. It says here clearly is a 9-year-old personality. Bobby picking at a scab on his hand, speaking in halting voice, not understanding who he was due to amnestic fugue. Being unaware. That's what fugue means, just being unaware. Like literally unaware to the point where you're not even in a conscious state, you know? And that's how strong the programming is. The experience or the experiment. Robert Moody, who was twice convicted of murdering 2 Tuscan women in 1993, died last week in an Arizona state prison. Moody, who claimed aliens controlled his mind, was serving a life sentence after having the death penalty tossed out by the courts. Yeah, he was under trauma. You know, he did these things not of his own volition. It was based off of the programming. A previous sentence had been overturned because Moody was found to have been incompetent to represent himself in court. Moody stabbed, beat, and shot to death an acquaintance, Michelle Malone, 33, MM33. MM33. But particularly 33, we already understand what that number represents. In November 1993, 5 days later, he stabbed and beat to death a neighbor, Patricia Magda, 56. 56 represents the number 11, and number 11 represents mind activation, mind control, mind activation. Slitting her throat and then bludgeoning her with hedge clippers. It's crazy. He robbed both women, including forcing Malone to write him a check for $500 and then another because the first check was smeared with her blood. After the murder, Moody pawned 2 guns stolen from Malone's home. Moody, 60 years old, this year died on October 7th at a hospital in Yuma after being taken there by paramedics. He had been held at the state prison in Yuma. No cause of death has been released. The county medical examiner is investigating, state authorities said. So just pay attention to the numerological significance when it comes to number 33, number 56, number 60. We understand what those numbers represent. Just in terms of what they make up in regards to the sum for 5, 6, we know that that represents 11, excuse me. I'm saying, I was going to say 60 because I'm seeing 60 right here. You know, sometimes you see it, you see something and you say it. It's just one of those things that, you know, slip up there. But number 11, we already know what that represents. Number 60, we already know what that represents. Or just number 6 in general. As well as 33. And 3 plus 3 equals 6. So it's all intertwined here in terms of the numerological significance and how it has to do with the controlling aspect of it, where this person does these things not of his own volition. You know what I mean? So these things, they have an esoteric undertone as well, just in terms of the subject at hand and the act that he carries out. The most tragic moment of Moody's story for most is when they view the police videotape of the accused killer being read the Miranda warnings. Here, clearly, is the 9-year-old personality, Bobby, picking at a scab on his hand, speaking in a halting voice, not understanding who he was, doomed to amnestic fugue, nor what the words in the Miranda warnings meant. It was the only time the accused was read his rights. And as you might expect, Bobby wasn't the killer, nor was he even present at the scene of the crime. The killer personality was named XE and was, by all present indications, created during Moody's service in the Marine Corps. Mental health professionals generally overlook the possibility of deliberate programming, or maybe that's part of the conspiracy against freedom of thought. Many shrinks are themselves unwitting accomplices in this conspiracy. I agree. Professional expressions of denial about the access and deliberate programming of dissociated children by agents of national security states is about as comforting as if they told you that the conclusions of the Warren Commission report were accurate and correct. Even certain members of the International Society for the Study of Dissociative Disorder has put DID in a separate legal category so that people expressing multiple personalities cannot be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Dr. Colin Ross, one of the leading experts on dissociative disorders, expressed the opinion that DID may be the cause of most of the serious problems of our society. Yes, it is. That's why you got a lot of people on antidepressants and whatnot. Most of these people under multiple personality disorder don't even know it. You know, they under bipolar, they diagnosed with it. Like, I know a person that's diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It shouldn't be something that they diagnose you with. That's just a natural thing for certain people, especially females, because they capricious by nature. So the bipolar aspect shouldn't be that surprising, but I guess when it comes to what you consume over your time, especially like the drugs and whatnot, that has a lot to do with it, as well as what you eat, believe it or not, right? Dr. Colin Ross, one of the leading experts on dissociative disorders, expressed the opinion that DID may be the cause of most of the serious problems of our society, such as gangsterism, drive-by shootings, schoolyard assassinations, random acts of terrorism, and all the rest of the trauma America has been experiencing over the past few years, an idea not yet examined by criminologists, prison experts, and others who will supposedly protect and serve. It says Moody was addicted to crack cocaine, was arrested for first-degree murder in January 1994. During the trial and sentencing that lasted until October of 1995, the former financial analyst claimed that space aliens were controlling his mind when he murdered the two women. Yes, that's part of the programming. That's part of the programming. He probably was playing out the role of XE, right? Because that was the killer. That was the personality. You know, that was the alter. It's the same thing with these celebrities. Like from like 2010, when Nicki Minaj, when she came on the scene, she called herself Roman or some shit like that. That's the alter. Beyonce with Sasha Fierce, you know, Jay-Z, Hove, Sean Carter. You know, all these people, they got all these different alters because that's their other personality. Moody clashed with his public defender, who wanted to put on an insanity defense, just like we read in the book. But the judge in that first trial would not allow Moody to replace him. The defense attorney eventually withdrew from the case, and Moody represented himself at trial. So this is the article that's related to the book. This is talking about Mr. Robert Joe Moody. He represented himself, but under a different alter, operating as a 9-year-old. Found guilty of both murders and sentenced to death, Moody had his conviction overturned when the state Supreme Court found that the judge made an error in allowing him to represent himself. Yeah, that was an error because he was under different programmings or different personalities, based off of the programming. Moody was tried again and convicted again for both murders in 2001. A judge again sentenced him to be executed. And, you know, this is not in any defense of this person. This is just to highlight the understanding of, you know, the level of programming that's so strong to the point where the subject doesn't even understand what he's doing. Just like when what's his name? Morgan Freeman, when his granddaughter got killed or whatever, or his stepdaughter, something like that, was being stabbed like 33 times, stabbed by her boyfriend 33 times. Even said that he was in a stabbing motion when the knife wasn't even in his hand no more. That's how you know that he was under a certain level of programming that was strong. When you stabbing somebody and then you stop stabbing them, but you still stabbing them, or you still thinking that you stabbing them, but the knife is not in your hand, you under a massive level of programming. It's the same thing with this case here. To understand dissociation is to understand the paradigm shift in our culture from an industrial culture to an information culture. To understand it is to look into the heart of the dissociated states of America and the dissociated states of Europe and the Orient. The seeds of dissociation have been sown throughout history, from our earliest recorded days unto the present. You can find evidence of it in the first terrors of the cavemen and the shamanic practices of most primitive cultures, to the present co-option of severely dissociated people found among the ranks of modern military recruits. A cross-section of our society finds its way into military service, and a representational number of them suffer from dissociative disorders. These form a fertile pool for recruitment of program personnel. After you've met a few of them, you realize they have one thing in common: they are highly suggestible. Thus, it is easy to capitalize on the trauma implanted in their child's mind by daddy, uncle, a neighbor, or whomever. Once dissociation shows up in a military entrance test, they are sorted out for programming. From their ranks are created autonomic assassins, amnestic couriers, and Mata Hari sexpionage agents who've given their involuntary all with no consent from requested. So Mata Hari, that goes back to Margaretha McLeod. She was someone who was a spy during World War I. She was a spy for Germany, and she was killed in France. And it's interesting because her name goes back to the Hindu goddess, the triple goddess known as Vishnu, which also is synonymous with the sun. So it's just very interesting. And reading on, who would do such a thing, you ask? Read on. Learn about the cryptocracy that has been gradually amassing its power over the human mind since the days when the swastika was forced underground, and its armbands torn from the sleeves, but its legacy was not removed from the hearts and minds of those welcome to America under Project Paperclip, when Nazi war criminals posing as scientists were flown from the front, hidden among those who had spilled their blood fighting fascism. The value of programming to the cryptocrats is understood when you realize its usefulness in harnessing the slave labor force and covering up crimes. More than one forensic psychiatrist has told me that our criminal justice system are not prepared to deal with these cases, and it's been that way for quite some time. The litigious actions of the False Memory Spin Drone Foundation have done further damage to justify by successfully obfuscating the realities of dissociative disorders and by blaming its cause on the treatments of incompetent mental health professionals, when they really understand, they know the deal. Whether a victim of DID trained and conditioned and honed for government use claims they have been raised in a satanic cult or a secret society or been abducted by aliens matters not at all. For eons of time throughout the entire history of mankind, as far as we know, war and trauma have created this evil, which is multi-generational, passed down the family tree from parent to child in an unbroken chain. The flavor of the torture matters not. It is none of the less torture, the style of programming. The style of programming matters not. It is nonetheless just programming. Usually the women are turned into slaves of one kind or another. The men are turned into killers or handlers or slaves. Regardless of the content of their story, the professional can only take it at face value, support the client, use it as a metaphor if nothing else, and try one technique after another until they get the results they are seeking: reintegration and eventual recovery. After spending the past 5 years studying program killers, it is refreshing to turn once again to Sue Ford's case. Most of us cannot keep from wincing at her vivid descriptions in certain parts. Others similarly victimized have experienced torture so terrible, literally unspeakable, that they might think Sue had a privileged time of it. It's crazy, man. Just the different levels of what these people have to go through or endure. Though Sue was used at a very high level in such ways that require her physical preservation, many survivors, it would appear, are generally too incapacitated to write their own story and too destitute or crippled to achieve sufficient recovery. Golly, that's That's some shit, there, man. That's some shit. That's how dirty this whole thing is. This whole experiment procedure. This whole government sponsored project. It's crazy, bro. It really is. Sue's story, truly a psychiatrist's nightmare come true, is like a fascinating, multifaceted gemstone washed up on a white sandy Hawaiian beach after having battled typhoons, riptides, and the treacherous forces of man and nature. It is the story of a survivor who truly has emerged as a victor against all odds. We must salute Sue. She has preceded the therapeutic community's understanding of dissociation and reintegration in the context of mind control. She's been a teacher as well as a patient and has inspired many of those who are leading the way toward real healing, not just a drugging of symptoms as is too commonly found to be the mental health cure for NPD-DID. And that's talking about like antidepressant and stuff like that. Through her valiant recovery from trauma-based mind control, Sue has paved the way for other survivors to follow. Let's join her in shining a light on the path for those survivors who are ready, willing, and able to stand and be counted. The liberation will be ours, all of us, to your own free thinking. So we're going to read more. I just wanted to cover this first aspect of it just so we can get a little understanding of the mind control experiment, the project MKUltra, and the intricacies.